Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. This week I've got another of our safety roundtable discussions to share with you. And as a reminder, these take place every Wednesday on Zoom at 9 a.m. You can find the details at safetyroundtable.co.uk. And basically it's an interactive roundtable discussion about a different topic relating to safety and risk each week. This week then I'm going to share with you a discussion we had about 10 days ago now on the topic of safety, how to make them care. So if you're watching or listening to this, no doubt you believe passionately that safety is really, really important. It's critical, it's crucial, it's indispensable to the success of your organisation. However, is that view necessarily shared by the other stakeholders, the board, your suppliers, your partners, your team members, etc.? And if it isn't, the question therefore is how to make them care. So in this roundtable, I present some thoughts for about 10 to 15 minutes, giving you some examples of where I've struggled with this, what I've done to overcome it, and give you a bit of a framework that you could maybe look to use in terms of your messaging and communications around safety. And then we open it up to a discussion and we have a really interesting, really thorough chat all around communication and how to make people care about safety. So I hope you enjoy it. If you do, and you want to join one of the roundtables, then head on over to safetyroundtable.co.uk and I'll see you there on Wednesday morning at 9. If not, enjoy this and see you next week for another interview. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining this morning's Safety Roundtable. Big topic today, one that seems to have resonated with quite a few people because we've got good sign up figures for this week, which is safety, how to make them care. So let's delve into that. I'm going to give you some thoughts as always on the topic, and then I'd love to get some interaction and participation and get your thoughts, experiences, challenges, successes, and all that good stuff as well. So let's start here then. Has health and safety gone mad? Some images on the screen. One of them's quite funny actually. I like the people saying you can only have one attacker at the time going up the ladder to attack the castle. 'Tis health and safety goneth mad. Now that's the perception, or it could be a perception that people might have about the world that we work in. But obviously, if you guys are here on this call or watching this recording or enjoying this as a podcast, then you are a self-selecting audience, right? You're here to talk about safety and risk management and doing things proactively and doing things well. So you, I'm sure, do not believe that health and safety has gone mad. But this is just an illustration of a challenge that we have as a profession because we've got this perception that we need to overcome. So we know it hasn't gone mad. We know health and safety hasn't gone mad. We know that it's crucial, it's critical, it's what we spend our lives doing. We're talking about the importance of it. We're driving improvements. We're trying to make sure that people get home safely. But we have this problem where if you think of health and safety, if you picked 100 people off the pavement and said an image of health and safety, they'd probably come up with a clipboard, a hard hat, a high vis. And that's the kind of perception that we need to deal with. And if we've got that perception, what does it mean that people's reactions towards health and safety are? Well, it's a bit of a yawn, it's disengagement, it's not caring. So that's what we've kind of got to work at overcoming, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And of course, if there's no resonance, if there's no caring, then we get bad outcomes. One example here of work-related musculoskeletal disorders from the HSE vital statistics. You can see whilst we're doing better than we were 20 years ago, things have flatlined a bit, and there's still far too much of this type of problem happening. So we need to see if we can go from good to great. And the way to do that, one of the ways to do that, is to achieve that resonance and achieve making people care more about health and safety. So just a bit of background to me if you've not come across me or joined one of these events before. So every week I do a few bits of content. I do this roundtable, I do a podcast as well called the Safety and Risk Success Podcast. And I do a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn as well, all talking about broad themes of safety and risk. In my day job, I work in the field of slips, trips and falls, specifically helping clients to prevent slip and fall accidents, injuries and claims. And in that arena, I've worked in some high profile cases, such as this co-op slip death back in 2015. The business has won some awards. The business is called Slip Safety Services. We've won some awards. We've got some great partnerships with the likes of AXA, and we've got some good blue chip clients like Network Rail, CBRE. We've helped thousands of sites to reduce the risk of slips and falls over the years, and we reckon at last count we're saving about 10 million of claims a year. So that all sounds pretty good if you think of it from that perspective. But in spite of that, in spite of the profile that I've got doing these types of events, working with IOSH, writing articles in magazines, winning awards, being quoted on the BBC when tennis players slip over on the courts at Wimbledon, I still struggle with making people care. So there's a huge amount of work I put into this, and I still struggle with this. So I'm sure it's something that will resonate with you guys as well. And in my field, what I see are these four issues, which I've called the SLIP problem, SLIP being an acronym. And if you've ever come across me before, you know I love acronyms. So irrespective of all the stuff that I do, I'm still struggling with the challenge that people don't care about slips and falls because they think that slips are simple, they think that slips are low cost, they think that slips are impossible to solve, and they think that slips are paltry. And we're working on that. We're making good progress, but there's still a long way to go. So I guess what I'm saying is I get this problem because it's a problem that I face as well. So hopefully the thoughts I'll give you will be helpful from that context. So how can we make people care then? And to me, this is all about communications. And so I've come up with another acronym. As I say, I'm a fan of acronyms here. Thinking about how can we make sure that when we're communicating and when we're engaging and when we're trying to make people care about this, whether that be our board, whether that be external stakeholders, whether that be our teams on the site level, that we're doing it in an effective way. And for me, these are the four things that come out. So I'll just run through these and then I'll give you a couple of examples from my world. So crafted. So what I mean by this is that we need to think carefully about this. Quite often we, can rely on, we've always done it that way, or let's be blindingly obvious and very very clear on what we're doing, but does that necessarily resonate with people? So we need to think a lot about why we're saying stuff and what we're saying and who's the audience that we're saying it to and what are we trying to get them to do as a result of hearing that message or seeing that message. So I think that the first point I'd make is we've just got to be giving this perhaps a little bit more thought and tailoring what we're doing a bit more than perhaps we might have been in the past. Secondly, we've got to be grabbing attention. So I've just bought this book I haven't actually read it. I've started reading it yet, and I'm struggling to think of the title of it now. It's really frustrating. I should have remembered the title. I think it's called Stolen Focus. That's it, Stolen Focus. And it's a book all around the fact that basically people's attention is almost impossible to get nowadays. And it talks about why that's happening, the trends, and then some of the neuroscience around it. As I understand it, I've not actually read it yet, but this is why I've bought it, because it sounded really interesting. But the point is that we've got to get people's attention. If we haven't got their attention, then it doesn't matter what we're saying, because if they're not giving it attention, then they're not seeing it, understanding it, and it's not going into their head. So we've got to be thinking about how we can make this attention grabbing. We've got to make this relevant. So a lot of this is about the audience that we're trying to engage with, and what are their priorities, and I guess also what's in it for them, right? So we're all, I know that those of us working in this field of safety and risk, we have something about us that we're thinking more about the wider world and doing good stuff perhaps than the average person. I think that's a generalization, but inherently humans are selfish. So we're always thinking about what's in it for me. That could be what's in it for me and my family. It could be what's in it for me and my friends. But we are inherently thinking about ourselves. And so we need to make our messages relevant to the people that we want to engage. Otherwise, they're just simply not going to care about it, and they're not going to care. They're not going to care, and therefore they won't do what we want them to do. We won't be able to influence them. And then the last thing I would say is emotive. So I think, I've been guilty of this in the past. In my field, the sheer weight of statistics that support the fact that slips and falls is a massive problem is undeniable, and yet that doesn't really grab people's attention. It doesn't really feel relevant to them unless you get some emotion in there. Because if you're talking about £1.5 billion of claims and £5 billion of hidden uninsurable costs, it's a bit like talking about the government talking about 9 billion for this, 25 billion for that, 55 billion for this. It just doesn't really resonate, because it doesn't capture your emotion, because those numbers are so big, they just don't have any meaning to what to do with you. And so I think getting something emotive in there, which tugs at the heartstrings, which makes people think that it is relevant to them, that it is going to affect them, I think is a really important characteristic for us to try to get into all of our communication around this subject of safety. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to do, is get people to care about it. It's all about the communication. So that's a bit of a framework to think about there. Really, the first one is a bit of a warning, I suppose, or a structure. We've got to think about crafting this message properly, and then the 3 points below are what we need to include in the message. So we need it to be attention grabbing, we need it to be relevant to the audience, and ideally we need it to be emotive. Now, if someone's feeling brave in a minute when I open this up, I would love to do a bit of a hot seat and see if we could craft something together in your world, or if we could figure out something as a group, as a way of getting a message across around the benefits of being proactive in safety and risk management, perhaps using this framework. But in the shorter term, in the meantime, I'll give you a couple of examples of stuff that I've done and talk to you about how I've tried to think about these with this care framework in mind. So there's 2 examples here, and these aren't the exact messages or the exact sort of text and images I've used, but they're pretty much spot on to what I have done. So think about a message to a board. And so this is, again, in my world of slips and falls. So headline, flabbergasted. Why have I used that headline? If I'm thinking about a board, they're probably going to be more erudite than an average person. This kind of word is a word that you don't see very often. so it's going to grab somebody's attention. And we've got an image there of somebody. Typically, I would use, by the way, both a male and a female for this, but I'm just using this as an illustrative image. Somebody dressed that looks kind of similar to how they might look. Perhaps this guy's a bit younger than the average board member, but business suit, business attire, looking shocked. Okay, would that capture someone's attention? Hopefully it would, in the right way. And then we're talking about something that they didn't know, but that is actually going to make them hopefully feel a bit peeved, a bit annoyed, or a bit. It's going to disrupt their thinking. It's going to make them want to think more, or decide, oh, I need to look into this. So it's all about trying to get some action and get people to care about a subject. So perhaps you didn't know this either, but the average business insurance premium, about 24% of it is made up of slips and falls. And that's pretty much irrespective of how well you as a business are managing your slip risks. And that's because insurers take industry categories, sector categories, and they look at averages and things like that. So if you don't have a good relationship with your insurer and you're not able to prove, all the risk management stuff and the safety stuff that you're doing, you're going to be grouped into a big pot, looked at as an average, and therefore about a quarter of your premium is going to be driven by slips and falls, even if you don't really have a particularly big problem. So that's the kind of message that is likely to be interesting and resonate to a board member. It's not going to resonate to somebody on the shop floor. It might not even resonate to you guys if you're a health and safety manager, because you're probably not dealing with buying of insurance and how much claims and premiums cost. But if you're going to that board level audience, then that is something that they're going to be aware of, because that's going to be a big line of expenditure. One of the large FM companies that we work with, I can't remember the exact numbers, but basically for every pound of profit that they make, of gross profit that they make, about 20% of that is taken up on their cost of insurance and risk. So in other words, for every working week of 5 days, one of those days they're spending paying for their insurance premium. So to them, if that was a member of that board, thinking about, is there a way we could reduce our insurance premium, is obviously a message that's going to resonate. So we've got some emotion, we've grabbed some attention, we've made it relevant to them, we've crafted the message thinking about the audience and on the outcomes we want to get. Whereas if we're trying to speak to somebody on a more of a shop floor level, that kind of message is never going to work. It would be an absolute waste of time to put that kind of message on posters around a business. So what is something that might work a bit more effectively to somebody on the shop floor? So this is a video. Again, I'm using a slip and fall example because that's my field and that's the area that I know most about, obviously. This is a video I'm going to play, which HSE produced a number of years ago when they ran a campaign called Shattered Lives. It was all about the seriousness of slips, trips and falls. So here we're being a bit more direct, we're being a bit more concise. We're talking about a 3-word message at the top: slips are serious, to try to disrupt people's thinking, to try and get their attention. But you can stop them. Don't let this happen to your colleague and friend. And that's when we're starting to bring in something that's relevant and something that's emotive. Because if I play click to start this video, I'm going to turn the sound off. Basically, oops, I've gone forward. So basically, this is a commercial kitchen. We've got 3 people who are making different things in the kitchen. One of the people is a man, and he's going to put some oil into a pan. And oops, he's not paying attention. He spilt a bit of oil on the floor. He then gets distracted by his colleague, the main chef. And I don't know about you, but it's frozen for me. Here we go. He gets distracted by the chef. He doesn't actually pick up the oil off the floor, and his colleague, the lady, turns around, slips in the oil, and smashes her head on the side of the kitchen unit, and her head shatters into 1,000 pieces because that was the point that HSE were making about shattered lives and how slips, trips and falls can can drive shattered lives. Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that's a very, very powerful video, very powerful imagery, very emotive, very relevant, very attention grabbing. So that to me is a great piece of comms around my field of slips and falls. So couple of examples there using that CARE framework of how we can try to get people more engaged. And really what this is all about is that I spend a long time talking about, the essence of what I do and what my business does, which is that we seek to leave people feeling safer. And we do that in our world by giving people the knowledge and empowering them with the tools to have more certainty that they're managing their slip and fall risks, and therefore if they're aboard, they're reducing their costs, or if they're on the shop floor, or if they're a health and safety or a facilities management professional, they're mitigating, reducing the risk of serious accidents like that one in the video happening. But to get people to feel safer, you've got to get them to care. And the way to get people to care, in my opinion, is how we can communicate with them better, and thinking about the ways in which we can do that and how we can frame our communications. So I hope that's been interesting and useful, guys. I'd like to open up, as always, now for a wider discussion. So go into reactions, raise your hand if you'd like to say a few words. Have you got any feedback? Did you learn anything? What did you think of that framework of CARE? What have you done, or what are you doing in your business right now, in your organization right now, to make people care? So how are you communicating the importance of safety, or your safety messages? Perhaps you've tried and not done so well at that before, and you've got some learnings that you'd like to share as well. So I'd be really interested to talk about that. If anybody wants to be brave and do a bit of a hot seat and work through some examples of some comms together, then I'd love to do that as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. Stuart, you've caught my eye because you're in my screen right now, so I'm going to invite you to join us first.
Well, what I would say is, in my business, in the security officer's business, I often put the stats in the monthly reports to all the managers to let them know what's happening in terms of accidents, slip, trips, fall, violence, all that kind of stuff. And then we disseminate that to the officers via our employee portal. But I suppose we don't really get the message across as of how, the whole start to finish of the accident, because they're often worried about oversharing information in terms of stats with a wider audience. But also, everyone's worried about GDPR, and if you say Fred Smith fell whilst looking at his mobile phone patrolling the floor and LSBU, it gets people a bit worried. So I suppose my thoughts are, how can I get the message to the officers that 50% of our accidents last year were slip trips, and then try and grab their attention to think about what they're doing when they go on patrol? I mean, I think that to take your point about, obviously you can't name the people, I fully agree with that. But I guess what you could do, I mean, for example, one of my best friends who I've known for 20 odd years, she slipped and fell quite seriously when she was about 8 months pregnant, and she shattered her ankle and she had a horrendous time of it. She's the sort of person that wouldn't want me to plaster her name and face all over my marketing, but I use her story all the time, and it's a true story, but I'm not going to use her name because she wouldn't want that. But I could easily give her a fake name and say that it's not a real name, but it's a real circumstance. I think maybe you could perhaps try that and just tell these stories, but without giving that slight bit of information. In terms of the point around how to get those officers to care, I suppose is what we're talking about today. I think those stories would help. If you've got any examples of, so like that video I showed of the kitchen slip, that was a classic example of where
the guy in the video is going to feel very guilty because obviously he poured that stuff on the floor, spilled that stuff on the floor, and then didn't clean it up, and it led to the lady getting badly hurt. But I always find that if you can sort of talk to people about, yes, keeping themselves safe, but I'm going to be contradictory to what I said earlier here. When it comes to safety, in terms of personal safety, people often think that they're a bit bulletproof themselves. But if you can sort of get onto their wavelength around the fact that their actions will help to keep their colleagues safe, their friends safe, to keep your mate Dave safe, that kind of thing, that seems to work quite well for me in my experience.
Great, thank you, Christian.
Hope that's helpful. Andy, how are you doing? You got your hand up? Oh, I can't hear you, Andy. Good old technology. This is where I need to have a stand-up routine ready for events like this, where people's tech goes a bit off.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
There we go. How are you doing?
Okay, yeah, fine. Are you? Yeah, good.
Yeah, I'm well, thanks.
Yeah, good. I think for me, like you say, it's around the communication piece and the engagement piece with our colleagues, getting them to understand the implications and why we do things. We don't put things in place to, piss people off. Basically, we put those processes in because we care. It's about that. Them understanding that process. So for me, it is engagement, communication, and actually speaking to the people.
Yeah. What do you think, Andy, about? I've talked before about kind of these what I call vertical silos, where the board wants to achieve a certain outcome, but maybe that isn't being communicated well enough downwards. But I mean, how do you overcome that challenge, or how have you done that in the past, where it's kind of maybe not so much just about getting the workforce to do stuff, it's about actually communicating up to the board and making them care a bit more as well?
That's probably the toughest thing. That's probably the hardest part of the process, because again, it comes down to cost. But if you can demonstrate the savings and a positive health and safety culture, then they will then listen to that process. And that's what I've done. So I've based it all around culture, and actually get the culture right, buy into the process, support the process, and then you'll see the benefits of a good health and safety culture. And that's very much it. And then you probably can go to the extreme around sentencing guidelines, etc.
Yeah.
But for me, it's all about that cultural piece and what the benefits are, and that's how I've always worked.
Yeah.
And then put some statistics in just to firm up the what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's that's my ways of working.
Yeah, it's a good point you've brought up there, which is that there's the sort of the positive side and the negative side. So there's the opportunity, which is good culture, and we're going to be talking about safety culture next week. Actually, I'm looking forward to next week's roundtable, which I'll plug in a minute. And I talked a few weeks ago about 4 Ps, which is if you can achieve protection in the business, that's going to drive performance. And every board, every business owner would want a higher performing business, because they know that that's going to drive profit and the power to do more stuff. So there's that positive side of things. But as you say, the sentencing guidelines, for example, is a big one, where sometimes people will resonate more with that kind of negative risk, and sort of, if things go wrong, it's going to cost you loads of money, and that will push people to act. So again, it's about finding stuff that is relevant to the right person, and one board is different to another board, and one set of colleagues is different to another set of colleagues. So that's where it's interesting and important to think about what's relevant, and then therefore bring in the emotive stuff depending on what's going to be relevant to them. So yeah, good. And
it's like you say, it's understanding your audience, isn't it? Because I've worked for businesses that have been very open and very positive towards safety, and I've had the flip side of that as well.
Yeah.
You know, so it is just understanding your audience and how we can drive that through a business.
Yeah, definitely. Good stuff. Thanks,
Okay.
Andy. Lewis, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So from my experience, I'm in the military, and I find it very difficult to get like safety messages across. And I think part of the reason is because obviously military is a big organization. So when, for instance, our health and safety training that we do, obviously they try and make it relevant for everyone within the military. And so for instance, working at height, when you do your working at height training, it's all about cherry pickers working on ladders. Now, potentially in the infantry, we don't work on ladders and cherry pickers. We work on the back of vehicles.
Yeah.
So you would think that they would tailor the training more towards working on the back of vehicles, because when I ask people do they working at height training, they look at me, well, this is not relevant to us. So why should I care about this?
Yeah.
You know, they just try and get through it. So I think it's very difficult because it just feels like the people that write these policies and these training is all people that sit higher up and haven't got a clue of how we actually work. You know, the work imagine and work as done. You know, the gap I think within the military is far too big, and people just don't care when they do this training because, and I can understand it, because they think it's not relevant to them.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how you get a message across about safety if the training is not even relevant to what we do.
Yeah, that's a big challenge because, you know, as I said, if you don't grab people's attention, then they can't get the message through. It's one point grabbing their attention, but you've got to keep their attention through that relevance and that emotion. And if you don't have the relevance, that's quite difficult. I suppose, I mean, that's quite a broad and difficult challenge to seek to solve. But I guess it's about maybe, as a suggestion, trying to capture some feedback or something so that you can actually use some data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, to go back up the chain perhaps a little bit. Because, you know, in your world, I've got absolutely no doubt whatsoever that everybody throughout the organization cares passionately about safety because of what you do, right? It's such a risky thing, so people are going to care from that perspective. But if the caring at the top, again, it's a vertical silo issue, doesn't get down to the boots on the ground, literally, in your sense, because we're losing relevance, then I think that's the kind of thing you need to try and capture and get back up the chain and seek to address it, I suppose. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts on what could be done there, but if you do, then feel free to chip in. But that's kind of what I would suggest as a broad starting point.
Yeah, I think from my experience as well is that when we go on operations, people, you know, safety is a big thing, but when we get back to camp, it sometimes got forgotten. And people think, well, we're back in the UK, everything is okay, we don't have to worry about safety now, you know. But so that there is that difference between operations going away and then people is far more safety conscious. But as soon as we get back in camp, where we're in the UK and we do our daily things, it just seems to be feels like they don't really care.
But yeah, I get that. I mean, ROSPA are doing something at the moment around falls. So not necessarily slips, but, you know, more like falls broadly. So sort of falling downstairs and falling off things, as well as slips and trips. But they're talking about trying to resonate with people in their home space, because, you know, people, it's kind of what you're saying here, people when they're at work have more of a dedication towards being safe and thinking about safety, and then they kind of switch off when they go home. So I suppose that's kind of analogous to what you're saying. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Lewis. Gary, how are you doing? I know you care about making people care.
Yeah. So just to follow on from really Andy, I'm just talking about communication, and I think it's interesting because as safety professionals, what we do is we tell people what to do, and how to do it, but we don't tell people on why we do it, which is what Andy was saying. So if you let's look at what communication do to get more business. Let's look at Apple. So what they do is the first thing they say in the advert is they say why everything we do challenges the status quo and we believe in thinking differently. Now, straight away that resonates with people because it hits that gut feeling and the mindset. Then they say how. The way we challenge the status quo is making our products beautifully designed, simple to use and user-friendly. And the final thing is, what they say is what if we just happen to make great computers and delighted by what so people relate to that when things to do. So I think it's really important about the power of language and the power of belief. So I constantly say to our team, when we communicate with anyone, tell them why we're doing it, tell people that we care. And this links into behavioral science. If we keep telling people what to do and how to do, it's understand why people turn off, and it links into their mindset as well. So if we keep telling them that they're not following a policy, that's going to get them into a fixed mindset, and they're going to accept that things are wrong. So I think what we need to do is start using behavioral science and start telling people why we do things, but also tell people when things go right. Start thinking on that positive reinforcement, because if it's all negative reinforcements, that really affects people, because all those health and safety professionals have traditionally talked about is when things go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. A couple of things very much resonated with me there. I think the first thing is think about selling, like you said, nobody cares about what you do as a business. So nobody cares really how I can help them to reduce their risk of slips and falls. What they care about is that their slips and falls reduce. So, if I did that through mind control or through a robot or through some kind of, they don't really care about that. So it's all about the outcome, and it's what's in it for them. So that's where that kind of emotive piece comes in. So I think you're right to talk about why. And it made me think a lot actually about, I was on holiday last week. I've got a very inquisitive and bright 7-year-old son, and constantly he's asking why. So, why, silly things. Why? Well, take your hat off, Nate. You can't wear a cap inside. It's rude. Why? Or anything like that. So it's and children don't have those kind of, they haven't had that sort of beaten out of them, as it were, in terms of like stopping to ask those questions. And so thinking about, if you've got a 6 or 7-year-old and they're always asking why, well, if we haven't communicated why, they're not going to understand it, and therefore they're not going to care. So I think that's a really useful thing, Gary. So thank you very much for that. Gareth, you're next.
Christian, thank you. Yes, just picking up on Louis' comment about the work and height training. So it needs to be tailored specific to what the guys are doing. So I work in an animal feed mill, it's premix, 25 kg bags and less. So we're doing manual handling training. And there's no point doing boring manual handling training that's delivered everywhere else. So we brought in a barbell, some dumbbells, and related to what was one of the guys in here is a PT. I did it through that. And show the guys how to lift properly. And you be careful when you twist. So we can't say don't twist, because we're going to twist at some stage.
Yeah.
But just be careful when we do it. There's risks there, but we control those. And with the barbell, I don't really want to twist. It doesn't feel right. And so putting the feet in the ground to get a good sturdy base. And then took it back into the office as well. And the thing in the office, manual handling training, what are they going to do? Lift a box of photocopy paper. So I thought, I'm not going to do that. So an empty box with a bottle inside, and some bottles where they could see inside. But I'm talking about, you may not be able to see inside it. You don't know what weight it is, and being careful how you lift and how you move with it, because stuff's going to move inside it. But being innovative in what we do and make it relevant. As Louis says, he's not going to have a mute sitting around beside one of his, a tank or whatever it is. You don't have it, you jump on the back of it to make it safe for the person doing the task. And I think that's where we're coming from. You know, it's don't write procedures that are just from the office. Go out and see it, go and do it, and modify them where we need to make it relevant to the person, so they go, that makes sense, I can follow that.
Yeah. And I think in that context of things like manual handling, you know, there will be, I'm sure if you ask enough people, examples of where, you know, somebody has, I don't know, injured themselves just before their daughter's wedding or something like that, and they couldn't walk their daughter up the aisle, or, you know, there'll be some kind of emotive outcome which supports that point that Gary just made of why are we doing this? Why is this important? And that's where the kind of that emotive stuff can come in. So I think, you know, trying to get some examples of that would be very powerful as well, because I'm sure there will be some, perhaps not necessarily from your business, but, you know, if you looked across similar businesses with that similar risk of manual handling, there's bound to be some interesting and quite powerful case studies of where things have gone wrong and how that's affected people, and how that's kind of, you know, over and above just these financial things, which again, people on the shop floor don't resonate with, because it's not costing them money. It's actually, well, you know, this cost me, I couldn't go on my holiday, or I couldn't get married, or whatever it might be. I'm just going to share, guys, quickly, because we're 40 minutes in. Next week's subject, which is here we go. I'm walking the walk here. I'm trying to get people's attention and get some emotion going into a message. So we're going to talk about safety culture, crutch or crux. So is safety culture critically important, or is it something that we maybe could sometimes we use as a bit of an excuse for why other things aren't happening? So that'll be an interesting discussion. And that'll be next Wednesday, 15th at 9. If you're registered on the Zoom, then you can automatically join that. Same link, same time next week. If you're joining us and you're not on the Zoom right now, then head over to safetyroundtable.co.uk and register and join us, and come and share some of your thoughts and insights. And then quickly, if any of the stuff we've talked about around slips and falls has resonated with you and you've got that risk in your business, there's a link there called christianharris.online. You can book in a free consultation, a free slip safety assessment with me, and we'll have a chat and see if there's anything that we could be doing to help advise you to reduce that risk in your business. So, Stuart, see you've got your hand up. Let's take your comments, and then if anybody else has got anything to add, then that'd be great. And if not, then after Stuart's finished, we can call it a day. How you doing,
Thanks,
Stuart?
I'm all right, thanks, Christian. First time I've been to one of these, and it's fantastic. Something I'll be coming to on a regular basis. Really enjoyed what you've done today and what you're doing here. I was hoping that the nudge one was coming up. Maybe I've just picked the wrong day, but this is just as interesting, so I'll continue. Lovely acronym, CARE. I thought that was fantastic. I thought of a couple of things in my head. One I've used in the past is FOTMAD, FOTMAD. Focus on the task, minimize all distractions, something I always get out to them. In fact, I've done that in a series of little wristbands that I hand out, and it helps with the reciprocity. Because when you give somebody a gift, it kind of automatically instills this need to give you something back. And if that is compliance with a safety rule or something like that, then happy days, you've made inroads, haven't you?
Yeah, I like that.
And the other thing I thought of was CSI when I thought of care: context, semiotics, and importance. So context is everything. Whenever you're going into anybody, you've got to get your context right, which is where your crafted thing came in. I thought that was fantastic. Semiotics, you've used quite a few semiotics today. Symbols and signs are everything. They instill something in an individual person. Everybody reads that semiotic differently. I've seen so many signs recently that are absolutely not selling the message that you want to get across, and it's very important you spend a lot of time getting that sign, that picture, like you did with the two pictures, the one of the boardroom member and one of the shop floor. Important to get that as part of that message. And importance was, I've read so many books recently, I've made it my life's passion to get inside people's heads and do what we're trying to do. And importance, everybody's got a sign around their neck saying, make me feel important. Yep. They all have. In fact, we all have today. We're here. Make me feel important. And if you remember that when you're going into any context with any person, whether it's the cleaner or the CEO, you've got a fighting chance of getting that message across and making them care, because that's what they want. They want to feel important. We all do. Yeah. Emotive, I came up with. I've been doing a lot of research on ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, if we go back to school and start looking at English literature and English writing, we came across persuasive writing. We all had to write an essay and make it as persuasive as we can. And I feel today we're losing it as safety professionals unless we go right back to school and write that essay where we were trying to prove a point, or we had to write it with emotion, we had to write with logic, and we had to write with pathos. So we had to, in order to do that we need to go back to school. We need to go back to school a little and write persuasively, which will cause us to speak persuasively. And I've got so many other things, but I'm going to leave it there today because I know we're short of time.
I appreciate that, Stuart. Thanks very much. It's and good to have you with us. And yeah, hopefully you'll join us again. So glad you've enjoyed it. And I think some great stuff you've picked up on there. Jennifer, how are you?
Hi. Good, thank you. I am brand new to the health and safety industry, but I have worked as a performance coach, and listening to the ideas of persuasion, what was in my mind was to have conversations with the individuals struggling to follow health and safety guidelines and ask them why, why is it annoying, why is it difficult, how is it affecting them, which shows a real value for their lived experience, asking for their ideas, because there may be small adjustments that would make more sense that are possible that have potentially been overlooked when setting out guidelines. Additionally, I thought, whilst potential improvements are in the pipeline, having the understanding that what they're doing might not be forever, we are looking to improve. However, at the moment, we value your ideas, we will take it on board and do that. And then you can say, for the moment, this is the best we have. We really appreciate your feedback and we will work on that. You've then listened to them, you've made them important, you've valued their lived experience in the job, and making it not forever, it's suddenly more bearable to do something you don't want to do. If it's a short-term thing, you can find the power or the endurance to do something, but then I would guess you do have to come back to them, a week later, 2 weeks later. We've put the email in, we're following it up. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah,
no, definitely, yeah. And I think the point about asking people is really, really important as well. So many of you on the call today or listening to this in retrospect would have been very kind enough to help me with a survey that I did recently, for example, and we're going to be talking about that in a webinar and some sharing the results in the next few weeks. But one of the reasons I did that survey was it was interesting to see, from my perspective, where are people actually at? So rather than assuming that people are worried about this or concerned about that or struggling with this or wanting to focus on that, let's actually ask them and see where they really are at. And I think sometimes in all types of communication, we're guilty of making these assumptions, and therefore we don't achieve that relevance because we're not speaking to the actual pains or the actual troubles of the right people. So I think that to me is a great point to make. So thanks for that, Jennifer, and thanks for joining. I can see there have been a few comments on LinkedIn. So let me just quickly look at these and try and pick up any of these as well. Scott made a great point here, actually. What about comparing the home environment to the work environment. So, for example, if there's a spillage on the floor in your own kitchen, would you leave that there versus at work? Well, I suspect, Scott, that you're right. You wouldn't, would you? You would do something about it. Comment here from Paolo. We need to put responsibility on the administration, giving an example of the consequences of high direct and indirect costs, giving an example of the lack of investment of its resources. Yep, fully agree. That's a good way of engaging with the board, thinking about the costs, because fundamentally the key responsibility of a member of a board is to drive profit in the business. And Vince has made a good point here. I love Vince. He's very direct. Let's cut to the chase. In most of this globalized world, harming working people, as distinct from caring for working people, is obscenely profitable. If that wasn't the case, it simply wouldn't happen. And I think that's a great point, Vince. And I think actually that is a perfect example of why we've got to be better as a profession of getting across and making people care, because actually there are lots of business cases that show that it's much more profitable to be caring for people than it is for making them suffer and be injured and be killed and things like that. But I think we haven't done a good enough job at putting that case across to our board. So I think that certainly supports that point. And Vince, I know we're going to try and get you onto the podcast at some point to talk about this kind of crisis of failings of caring a bit more. So. All right, guys. Well, look, it's 10 to 10, so we've done a good 50 minutes. I really enjoyed this conversation this week. Thank you all so much for joining, and for those of you for sharing your insights as well. Do come along next week when we're going to be talking about safety culture, crux or crutch. Interesting to get your views on that, and I'll probably be a bit disruptive and challenging and give a contrary view next week a little bit more. And finally, if there's anything you think that myself or my team could be helping you with when it comes to any of these communication things or slips and falls, then do get in touch as well. So thanks very much, guys, and I look forward to connecting with you all again next week.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.